Shana Tova, everyone. Before we embark on our Torah reading and our Haftarah, I wanted to frame both of them for you in a very particular kind of way, and to share with you how this year especially I read them differently, and they feel very responsive, to me anyway, to the hardest question of the Jewish people now who live outside of Israel. And that question is, how do we talk about Israel? How do we think about Israel? What should American and North American, Canadian rabbis say about Israel on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur? Now, I grew up in a family, my father-in-law, Rabbi Arnold Goodman, he talked about Israel every year on Rosh Hashanah for 50 years. He gave 50 years worth of Rosh Hashanah sermons. And it felt particularly important that one would give some kind of an Israel conversation or sermon this year, because as you know, this is the 50-year anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. It's 2023. The Yom Kippur War was in 1973, and many of us, people of a certain age, like my age as well, can remember exactly where we were on Yom Kippur. I remember where I was at the Hebrew Educational Alliance on Yom Kippur Day when word came out. And you all remember how desperate and dangerous it was, how Moshe Dayan said that the walls of the Third Commonwealth are shaking. I remember as a kid, I was in elementary school at Hillel Academy in Denver, saying Tehillim, 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 morning, noon, and night, praying for Tzahal. So it feels like 50 years later, one should say something about Israel. And yet, Lord, Israel is so complicated, and what would one say? So there's a few reasons. First of all, I think I just want to name that the world has changed a lot since my father-in-law was a rabbi, and how we get content on Israel has changed. Every one of you here is literally a click away from an amazing podcast, an illuminating podcast by actual Israelis who live in Israel, who know Israel, who get Israel better than any American rabbi ever could, and who speak perfect English. And so you're always you're a click away from the very best content on Israel. So why then would an American rabbi who just reads the same stuff you read and listens to the same stuff you listen to take your spiritual time, these incredibly sacred moments, and say something about Israel that you could hear on the podcast or your news source of your choice? That's one reason that it's hard. And the second reason that it's hard is that it's just so very sad. If you heard Micha Goodman's talk, Micha, of course, I think everybody at this point knows who Micha is, but Micha knows more about Israel than I think anybody. Today, he has written any number of books that are bestsellers in Israel. He's literally an advisor to prime ministers in Israel. And just through a quirk of circumstance, he happens to be connected to us. And he gave us a 45-minute slot last Sunday. And he said three things that are just super sobering. He said, number one, that all Israelis, what they all are united by is that they call this season Black September. It's Black September. And it's Black September both because the Air Force is weak and Israel's defenses are weak because so many pilots are not reporting for duty. And if they don't report for duty at a certain point, then they're not fit to fly. And if they're not fit to fly, our Israeli Defense Force airlines and the Air Force is just weakened. And so it's Black September because if there's a time for Israel's enemies to pounce, it would be now. It's Black September also because both, the country is split in half, as you know, and whatever the court decides, they had the hearing this past week, half the country is going to declare the country not a democracy. So if the court says what the Knesset did is unconstitutional, we, the court, still have power to declare things unreasonable, then half the country says, aha, what a power grab, 15 people unelected, it's not a democracy. And if the court says what the Knesset did is okay, then the other half of the country says, aha, it's not a democracy. It's Black September, not a democracy either way. It's Black September, Tzahal is weak. And then the third reason it's Black September is we asked him, is there any political compromise that can get us out of this mess? And the short answer is no. Jews talk, and there was something that was going on that was a possible scenario, but then loose lips sink ships, and it came out, and then parties on both sides disowned it. So there is now currently no possible settlement of this problem, and so we ended the conversation. Amy Klein chats me, and she says, ask him about hope, ask him about hope. I said, Micha, is there any hope? I mean, after he just said what he said, I said, is there any hope? Here was his answer, and now you know I'm not making this up if you heard his podcast. He said that, when Israel had left-wing governments, we got the intifadas, and the country learned, the lesson it learned was we can't have a left-leaning government, we need a centrist government. And there was always a slight fantasy of some that maybe we just need a pure right government. And there's some Hebrew word to say a pure right government. Well, Micha says the best way to kill a fantasy is to live that fantasy. And now that they have a pure right government, the strong majority of the country gets that that's also not healthy. And so that the future governments should be centrist. So Micha, this was Micha's hope. When Amy chatted me up to say, ask him about hope, and I said, ask about hope. Here's his hope. He said, this right-wing government is a vaccine like the COVID vaccine, that if it doesn't kill the patient, will make it stronger, because from now on, Israelis, when they go to elect, will elect centrist governments. Not too left, not too right, but centrist governments. That's the best he could do. So now back to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So consequently, what's a rabbi going to say in the face of that? But when I was studying the texts that we're going to read now, Genesis 22, and when I was studying the Haftorah, they both speak so powerfully to this moment, not to the analysis of Israel on the ground. That, if you want that, do a podcast. If you want that, listen to Hartman. If you want that, listen to the Times of Israel. I'm not an Israeli scholar. So not about the facts on the ground in Israel. But the Torah and the Haftorah speak to us and to our hearts. How do we, as American Jews who love Israel through this? So the question on the table is, how are we to be thinking about, talking about, acting towards Israel in this month, which is not only now Tishrei, but is also Black September, as Israelis themselves call it. And just to recap, Black September because the military is weak because of the striking Air Force pilots. Black September because both halves of the country say that whatever the court does, it's not going to be a democracy. One half of the country is going to say it's not a democracy. And Black September because there's not a negotiated settlement. So what do we do? And my offering to you was that our Torah reading and our Haftorah reading give us lenses, not for how to understand the facts on the ground in Israel, you can get that from your podcasts or news sources, can give us an approach to how to act towards Israel. So here we pick up, and Eliza's entrance here with Eder is perfect timing, if you don't mind coming up for a second, because I want to actually, it's actually very helpful that you're here. Of course, the whole idea of Genesis 22, sacrifice your son, your only son, whom you love, is incomprehensible. It's inexplicable, right? We've always known that, right? We've always known. Every year you've ever thought about it, sacrifice your son, your only son, whom you love, is incomprehensible, it's inexplicable. And then I've been davening next to Eder. And davening next to Eder made me even realize further how incomprehensible, inexplicable this command is. What a cutie pie. And he's listening too. By the way, he's just like the best behaved kid ever. Anyway, I then came, thank you so much. But davening with Eder, by the way, no one else has done this, but I have given Eder a nickname. He's Rabbeinu Eder Matan Rosenberger, which is the Remerer Rebbe. Rabbeinu Eder Matan Rosenberger. So davening next to him has given me an insight into this Torah reading, etc., which is that the incomprehensibility of it all is exactly the point. And another thing is the point. Abraham has two loves in this story. He obviously loves God. He obviously loves his son Isaac. When faced with this incomprehensible situation, beyond incomprehensible, what does he do? There's kind of two iconic Abraham moves. One is he says, Hineni, I am here. And then, Vayashkem Avraham Baboker. He gets up and does it. Now, I think what Abraham does is wrong on the merits. I don't think it's defensible. I think if it's a test, he clearly failed the test. I'm not defending Abraham. What I am saying, though, is that in response to inexplicable and in response to painful, what he does is show up. He says, I am here. He shows up, and he actually, and he takes action. That speaks to me about Israel now, because to be honest with you, it's utterly incomprehensible to me. I just don't understand. I've listened to 1,000 hours of podcasts. I have read 1,000 pages of 1,000 scholars. I do not understand why this, why now. And not all the podcasts in the world could explain it to me. Not all the articles in the world could explain it to me. Not all the lectures in the world could explain it to me. You know, we had 2 Israel trips as a congregation. We went in April for Spark. We went in June with Hartman. Twice being in Israel, plus, you know, a dozen times over the last year and a half with our father. And I still do not understand why this deterioration in the country now. Why this they talk about Milchemet Achim. Now, a civil war. Danny Gordis, who's no lefty. Danny Gordis, the Toastmaster of 1,000 AIPAC dinners, had a whole session involving some scholar at an Israeli university, and the title of it, I don't see how this doesn't end in bloodshed. That was Danny Gordis talking to an Israeli scholar about Milchemet Achim. I don't understand it. Like, I don't understand God's command about Abraham and Isaac, but here's what I do take away from this reading. Our response to inexplicable when we are in love is Hineni and Vayashkem Avraham Baboker. Our job this year is to show up for Israel, even though we don't understand, even though we don't get it, even though we can't explain it. Our job is to show up for Israel and say, I am here. I just love you so much. I just love you so much. My love for you, with all what is going on, I don't get it, but I'm here for you. I think that's the message of Genesis 22. So we were talking about how the Torah reading provides us one lens of one response to Black September and to Israel today, which is in the face of what is inexplicable, incomprehensible, utterly opaque, we show up and we find a way to be present, Hineni. Our Haftorah that Nate Birnbaum is going to chant in a minute, I think gives us a very different lens and very rich emotionally, and it feels very true, like it was written today emotionally. Take a look on page 113. These are the most famous lines from the Haftorah. Page 113. Thus said Adonai, a cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. So I think this is a different lens, which is actually weeping. And it made me think about an op-ed piece that Bret Stephens wrote in the Times, this summer, and it was such an interesting column, and it connects me to this Haftorah. He starts the column by writing that some academic institution singled out Israel for special condemnation and said that Israeli scholars couldn't participate in their work. And Bret Stephens starts the column by saying, they allow Russian scholars to do their work and Iranian scholars to do their work. They've singled out Israel And how is that? And then he writes, that's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2, he said, I've spent the last years, decades, writing columns like that. And now I realize, what's the point? Because whatever this academic institution did, however inequitable, unfair, not right it was, it can't compare to hurting Israel to what Israel is doing to itself. And that Israel is shooting itself in the foot far more than what any academic institution could ever do in its double standards. And I think that is Rachel weeping for her children. There is, I think, a new move. For so long, I just speak for myself. For so long, I was like in warrior mode, ready to defend Israel. And I feel like this is a different era where what we're defending Israel is Israel itself is in a Milchemet Achim situation. And the response to that is not pouncing. The response to that is weeping. And that is a lens from Rachel. But the response to Rachel's weeping and refusing to be comforted is, thus said Adonai, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears, for there is a reward for your labor, declares Adonai. They shall return from the enemy's land, and there is hope for your future. Your children shall return to their country. And the most famous and the most iconic verse in this Haftorah is at the very end, verse 20. Haben yakirli Ephraim im yeled sha'ashuim. Truly Ephraim is a dear son to me, a child that is dandled. Whenever I've turned against him, my thoughts would dwell on him still. That's why my heart yearns for him. I will receive him back in love, declares Adonai. And that's the end of the Haftorah. So it's a complex two-step emotional reaction. One is weeping rather than pouncing. And the second is not losing hope. And the second is yearning. And it builds on this memory of Haben Yakirli Ephraim. Like I have memories of my son Ephraim when Ephraim was so young. I just have a special place in my heart for Ephraim. I'm always going to take Ephraim back in love. And I think every one of us here has special feelings and associations and memories of Israel. And albeit it's in Black September now, all of us have these associations, and we pray not only that we'll be present now in the challenge of Israel, but that we will be present in better days for Israel.